Ever felt that pang of frustration when you're trying to explain something really important, something you truly believe in, but it just doesn't seem to connect?
Oh, absolutely. It's like there's this invisible wall, even when you're technically speaking the same language.
Exactly. Maybe you're hashing out a strategy with a colleague, someone with totally different priorities,
Mhm.
or trying to share a conviction with someone whose whole worldview is just miles apart.
Yeah, that feeling where your message just hits a barrier, it can be really confusing.
It really can. And that's sort of the territory we're diving into today.
Because that desire to bridge the gap, share something meaningful, it feels blocked sometimes when different perspectives just cloud the lines of communication.
Totally. And our roadmap for this, well, that comes from a really interesting source you flagged, gospelbridges.pdf.
Hmm.
Now, the title itself, it hints at a specific religious context, and yeah, that's accurate. This excerpt, it's basically a guide for Christians looking to share their faith with Muslim individuals.
But what's really compelling about it, I think, is that it goes way beyond just what to say. It really digs into the how. How do you communicate effectively?
Right.
And the part we're focusing on breaks this whole challenge down into like three core things.
Yeah.
The message, the context of the person you're talking to, and the methodology, the way you actually communicate.
Okay. So our mission for this deep dive is really to pull out the key wisdom from this gospel bridges idea.
Right.
Think of them like strategies for communicating that help someone really hear and grasp what you're saying, especially when there are big cultural or religious differences involved.
Exactly. And while the source itself is rooted in that specific faith scenario, the underlying principles about understanding context, tailoring your approach,
Yeah,
those are just gold dust for almost any situation where you're trying to connect across different viewpoints.
that's a great point.
Right.
It's about making sure your message isn't just, spoken out loud, but actually gets heard and understood within the other person's world,
Yeah.
their frame of reference.
Precisely. Their experiences, their beliefs, their cultural understanding, all of it matters.
The source actually kicks off with this really vivid story. It immediately shows what happens when you ignore context and methodology. It's about this guy, John.
Ah, yes, John. Very enthusiastic, wanted to share his faith in a Muslim community.
His heart was in the right place, apparently.
Oh, for sure. But his approach, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly tailored. He decided to organize this huge mega gospel consult.
Right in the heart of the neighborhood, and you can just picture it, can't you? Big sound system, maybe loud music.
And the reaction from the local Muslims, it was immediate. And for John, completely baffling.
They weren't just uninterested, were they?
No, not at all. They were questioning his purpose. Why are you here? Clearly stating, we are Muslims. And they had strong objections.
To what, specifically?
Things like how some people were dressed, which they saw as immodest, the music itself, and even core Christian ideas, like the concept of God having a son. That was a major sticking point.
Wow, so the barriers went up almost instantly.
Instantly. And what's really telling, as the source points out, is John hadn't even really gotten to the core of his message yet. The way he showed up created the barrier.
And his conclusion was?
That Muslims are just resistant, hard to reach, which kind of misses the point, doesn't it?
Yeah, it frames it as a problem with them, not maybe the approach.
Exactly. It highlights that fundamental communication error, assuming everyone sees things the way you do, forgetting the listener's context.
So overlooking context, the who, and methodology, the how, it just leads to miscommunication, frustration on both sides.
Complete miscommunication. It might not even be a rejection of the idea itself, just a failure to even create a space where the idea could be considered.
Which brings us back to that framework the source introduces.
Right. Message, context, and methodology. The three pillars, essentially.
Okay. So message is the what, the core idea itself.
Yep. Then context, that's the who, the people you're trying to reach. And the source is really clear here. You can't just lump everyone together.
Like saying all Muslims.
Exactly. It stresses the huge diversity within the Muslim community. Different backgrounds, cultures, levels of observance. You can't assume one size fits all.
That's critical, understanding that diversity.
Absolutely. And then methodology, the how, the way the message is actually delivered.
And the source uses an analogy here, right? Something about languages.
Yeah, it's a good one. It compares it to preaching in Swahili to an audience that only speaks Arabic.
Okay.
So you might be delivering your message perfectly clearly in Swahili. You understand it. Maybe any other Swahili speakers do too.
But for the Arabic speakers?
It's just noise, confusion. You haven't actually communicated to them.
Ah, okay. So the methodology isn't about changing the message.
Not at all. It's about adapting how you communicate so the message can actually land, be understood within their framework.
Which leads us right to this core idea of gospel bridges.
Mm-hmm. Think of it as a metaphor, like a physical bridge helps you cross a river.
Or a digital bridge connects different computer systems.
Exactly. These gospel bridges, in this context, are ways of communicating that build a platform. They help the listener get to a place where they can genuinely hear and engage with the message.
Without getting tripped up by unnecessary obstacles.
Right. And the source identifies two main kinds of obstacles, or dangers, as it calls them, that often block understanding for Muslims hearing the Christian message.
What are they?
Doctrinal differences and cultural differences.
Okay, let's start with doctrinal. What are the big ones?
Well, the source lists several key theological points where Islam and Christianity really diverge, like the core Islamic belief that God cannot have a son.
Right, that's fundamental.
And the Christian concept of the Trinity is seen as heretical, like believing in multiple gods. There's also the Islamic teaching that Jesus didn't actually die on the cross.
Okay.
Plus, the idea that the Bible has been corrupted or changed over time, the belief that God, being transcendent, cannot become a man, and also the idea that no one can pay the penalty for someone else's sins.
Wow, those are significant differences. Foundational.
Absolutely. And the source's point is just stating the Christian beliefs on these points without understanding the Muslim perspective or providing context, it's usually just ineffective.
Or worse, maybe alienating.
Could be. It can reinforce the divisions rather than fostering any kind of understanding. It builds walls, not bridges.
Okay, so those are the doctrinal hurdles. What about the cultural ones?
These can be just as important, maybe even more so sometimes in initial interactions. The source points out several key areas.
Like?
Religious language itself, just using the term Son of God for Jesus. From a Muslim perspective, that can sound like you're changing the very nature of God, of Allah, or associating partners with him, which is shirk, the most serious sin in Islam.
So the words themselves carry very different weight.
Immense weight. Then there's something like dress. Islam emphasizes modesty for both men and women. So common Western styles of dress might easily be seen as immodest, even provocative.
Okay, that makes sense.
What else? Diet is a big one. The whole concept of halal permissible food and haram forbidden food.
Like pork and alcohol being forbidden.
Exactly. And also rules about how animals are slaughtered. These aren't just suggestions. They're deeply ingrained religious practices. Not being sensitive to that can create social awkwardness or even offense.
Got it. Anything else?
Music, interestingly. The source notes that many Orthodox Muslims view music as forbidden, something to be avoided. So that gospel concert idea from John's story.
Double problem, potentially.
Right.
The message and the medium.
Right. And finally, gender interaction. In many traditional Muslim cultures, there's a degree of separation between men and women who aren't close family. Ignoring that can cause discomfort.
So all these cultural points, they're like potential minefields if you're not aware.
That's a good way to put it. They can impede understanding before you even get to the core message. And that's where gospel bridges come in, being aware, being thoughtful, communicating in a way that minimizes that kind of confusion or unintended offense.
It's like learning a bit of the local etiquette before you travel somewhere new.
Exactly. It doesn't change who you are, but it helps you connect respectfully.
Okay, so we understand the need for these bridges. How do we actually, build them? The source points to Jesus himself.
It does. It uses his interactions as a primary model. Specifically, it highlights two conversations from the Gospel of John. Chapter 3 with Nicodemus and chapter 4 with the woman at the well.
Two very different people.
Not as different as you could get back then. Nicodemus, respected Jewish leader, highly educated, probably worried about his reputation, comes to Jesus secretly at night.
Right. And the woman at the well.
The Samaritan, socially ostracized, multiple failed marriages, religiously marginalized from the Jewish perspective. She meets Jesus in broad daylight at a public well.
So total contrast in status, background, everything.
Exactly, and Jesus' approach.
Yeah.
Completely tailored to each one.
How so?
With Nicodemus, who came seemingly out of intellectual curiosity mixed with fear, Jesus engages him in this deep theological discussion about being born again. He meets Nicodemus's intellect, but also gently challenges his fear, talking about God's love, not condemnation.
Okay. And the Samaritan woman.
He meets her right where she is, literally and figuratively. He asks her for a drink, crossing social and ethnic barriers right away. He addresses her past without condemnation and speaks to her thirst for spiritual truth, her questions about worship, the Jewish versus Samaritan debate.
That question about where to worship.
Exactly. He doesn't dismiss her question, he redirects it,
Yeah.
pointing her toward a deeper personal worship that isn't tied to a specific place.
So in both cases,
He first understood the person, their background, their fears, their questions, their needs, and then he adapted his message and his approach. He built a bridge, sometimes starting with the heart, sometimes with the head, connecting with the whole person.
and his followers picked up on this method. The source mentions Paul.
Yes, the Apostle Paul is presented as a key example of someone who really grasped and applied this.
The famous all things to all people verse.
That's the one, 1 Corinthians 9. I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might save some. And the source gives concrete examples,
Like what?
like having Timothy circumcised. Timothy had a Jewish mother but a Greek father. Paul did that, so Timothy's mixed heritage wouldn't be an unnecessary stumbling block when reaching out to Jewish communities.
Adapting to the cultural expectation there.
Precisely. Or Paul himself taking a Nazirite vow in Jerusalem. That involved specific Jewish purification rituals. He did it to show respect and avoid causing offense, clearing the way for the message.
And didn't he do something similar in Athens?
Yeah, absolutely. Acts 17, he walks around, observes their objects of worship, even finds an altar to an unknown god. He engages with their philosophy, quotes their own poets.
Finding common ground first.
Exactly. He studied their context and built a bridge from their understanding towards the message he wanted to share. He didn't just parachute in with foreign ideas.
So following Jesus' example, Paul actively created these gospel bridges.
That's the argument, yes. Adapting the method, not the core message, to connect effectively.
Okay, this is making a lot of sense. But when is the right time? Is it always appropriate to try and build these bridges?
That's a really important question. The source stresses sensitivity. It's not about having a formula. It mentions being sensitive to the Holy Spirit's leading, but also looking for a conducive context.
A conducive context. What does that look like?
Well, things like having a quiet place where you can actually hear each other. Having enough time so you're not rushed or interrupted constantly.
Makes sense.
Ideally, it's often better one-on-one rather than in a big group. And in some more traditional cultures, as we mentioned, interacting, same gender, men with men, women with women, can be more comfortable and appropriate.
And crucially,
Crucially, the source really emphasizes that these bridges work best after a relationship. Some level of trust and friendship has already started to form. It's not usually a first meeting tactic.
right, build rapport first. Okay.
Right.
Any other sort of general guidelines for using these bridges?
A couple of really key reminders. First, and this is vital, the bridge is not the gospel. It's not the message itself.
It's the pathway to the message.
Exactly. It's an invitation, a way to help someone be open to hearing and considering the message. Second, remember that every single person is unique.
No one size fits all.
Definitely not. What works as a bridge for one person might not for another. You have to be discerning, pay attention to the individual, and rely on, as the source puts it, God's Spirit leading.
And it's not just a quick transaction.
No, the source frames using a gospel bridge as the start or maybe a deepening of a long-term, caring, Christ-centered friendship. It's relational.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up then. The core insight here really is that truly effective communication, especially across big divides like culture or worldview, it demands that we genuinely understand the other person's context.
Who they are, where they're coming from.
And it's about actively building bridges of understanding, adapting our methodology,
Yeah.
ensuring our message isn't just broadcast, but received and understood within their framework.
Precisely. Not changing the core message, but removing those unnecessary barriers so it actually has a chance to connect.
And, thinking about it, this isn't just for religious conversations, is it?
Not at all. Think about it in your own life. Maybe you're presenting a project at work to people from totally different departments with different priorities.
Yeah, they speak different languages sometimes, business-wise.
Exactly. Or navigating cultural nuances in your neighborhood. Or even just trying to have a real conversation with someone who holds completely opposite political views.
That can feel like crossing a huge divide.
It can. But understanding their perspective, their language, finding ways to build those little bridges of communication, it can make a world of difference. It really boils down to empathy, doesn't it? And being intentional about how we connect.
That really lands. So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. Where else in your life could this idea of building bridges by really understanding context and adapting your approach lead to better communication, deeper understanding?
Yeah, think about specific situations, specific people maybe. Where could focusing on the who and the how, not just the what, help you connect more effectively? Something to mull over.